Well, last night's episode of Arrow, I didn't actually get a chance to do a vlog last night, mainly because I didn't have time, but I'm doing one now, which that is what counts, right? The episode is titled Guilty, and the promo would have you believe that it deals with Roy's dreams. His dreams being he killed Sarah in some sort of Mirakuru-induced rage. Seeing as how I was just so in the moment, I didn't actually use any of my detective skills, what little that I have. What I mean by that is, how could Roy have possibly changed costumes into his traditional red hoodie, or his old red hoodie, to go and kill Sarah, because he was in his Arrow uniform, his Arsenal uniform, when Oliver and Sarah had just stopped the count that night. It is very unlikely that Roy killed Sarah, if that is any indication. Right off the bat, this episode was good. I don't think it was great, but it is one of the better episodes of the season, and I did like it better overall than the previous episode, which I felt was a little bit lacking. I'll tell you why. First of all, we actually got some nice characterization around Roy and some nice development of his relationship with Oliver. We have now seen how far these two have come, and we see this mutual trust that goes on between them. It's a good thing they have decent chemistry, because otherwise this wouldn't work, but both of them do give pretty good performances in this episode. Stephen Amell and Colton Haynes, they do pretty well. Now, like I said before, the promos would have you believe that it's solely focusing on Roy. However, there is also a B plot that actually eclipses what is supposed to be the main plot and becomes the main plot. What I mean by that is someone is going around beating up mobsters with brass knuckles and leaving their corpse hanging upside down. And the main suspect is Ted Grant, the person who has been giving Laurel boxing lessons, because one of the bodies is in his gym, and he gets arrested, and everyone thinks it's him, even Oliver. Oliver thinks it's him, and it's revealed that Ted Grant used to actually be a vigilante. He had this partner, I think his name was Isaac. They used to go around in the glades and stand up for the little guy as these vigilantes. So it turns out that the perpetrator of these new crimes previously killed a high-ranking mobster 6 years ago, and after that he was captured and tortured, and now he's come back to kind of take revenge on Ted because Ted had basically cut him loose after killing the mobster. What works about this is that they really try to weave these two relationships together. Ted and his ex-partner, and Oliver debating whether or not to cut Roy loose, because Roy actually makes a very mature decision and flat out tells Oliver and Laurel, I killed Sarah. I mean, if these dreams are any indication, I likely killed Sarah. And Felicity, I mean, he conveys this to Felicity first, and Roy was actually pretty mature this episode. He says, could you test my blood for Mirakuru? The biggest problem with this episode, in fact, was the fact that it seemed a little too preoccupied with setting up Ted Grant, who is going to become Wildcat, or in the comics he is known as Wildcat. It seemed a little too preoccupied with that, and focusing on this whole three-way relationship between him and the Arrow and Oliver and Laurel, and kind of weaving all this together and seeing how these interactions play out. And I actually think Roy got a little shortchanged this episode. We didn't get as much with him as I would have liked. And as a result, his storyline feels a little underdeveloped when compared to Ted Grant's storyline. So that was really the biggest problem. But aside from that, I really liked how Roy has been given this sense of purpose, being Arsenal, which they do give him the name, which I think was a little forced, but as far as name drops go, I seen worse. There was nothing really I particularly hated in this episode, not even Laurel. I don't like Laurel still, and I've seen the pictures of her in the Black Canary outfit, and I'm just not on board with it. I have never been on board with it. Sarah was fine. In fact, Sarah was much more likable than Laurel. She was more interesting than Laurel. I did not want to strangle her each week like I do with Laurel, but, to be fair, Laurel as a character was not overly obnoxious or idiotic this episode. And I have to say, J.R. Ramirez, I believe is the guy's name, who plays Ted Grant, he actually does a very good job. Do I think he's a little bit too young to play Wildcat? Probably. I miss Dennis Farina, the guy who played Wildcat or voiced Wildcat on Justice League Unlimited. In fact, I'll tell you who would have been really good as Wildcat is Frank Grillo. He has MMA experience, which is already a starting point for Wildcat's whole boxing expertise. I can buy him as someone who can beat someone up with his bare hands. But as it stands, J.R. Ramirez, I hope I'm getting his name right. He's fine. He makes for a pretty good Wildcat, or at least a pretty good Ted Grant up to this point. How he will fare if he ever suits up, I don't know. It is kind of getting to the point where I'm starting to wonder how many people have costumes lying around. Granted, I know this show takes place in the larger DC universe, or at least it's setting up its little mini DC universe because the movies are because Warner Brothers is being asinine with the movies. But still, you have to wonder how many people are capable of beating up multiple assailants with their bare hands as these costumed vigilantes. There's only so much disbelief that I can suspend. But overall, the action was good. The characters were likable. I liked the relationship between Oliver and Roy. I felt that was nicely handled. I wish it had gotten a little more development because, like I said, I think this easily could have been 2 episodes. This is somewhat what I was talking about with this week's episode of Star Wars Rebels, Empire Day, how that kind of had 2 plot lines going on. But instead of sort of dividing the episode's time, the first half being this one and the second half being this one, this kind of tried to juggle these 2 plot lines, the plot line of Wildcat and the plot line of Roy possibly killing Sarah. It tried to juggle these 2 over the course of the entire episode. So in a way, that's almost worse because we're constantly shifting between these 2 and it gets a little much. Again, maybe if we had a complete episode with Roy trying to come to terms with him possibly killing Sarah and then leaving the decision open to whether or not they were going to cut him loose, that would have actually made a pretty interesting lead-in to a future episode with Wildcat and where we tackle this whole backstory of him having a former partner that he cuts loose. I honestly think that would have worked a lot better than trying to cram them into both episodes. But to be fair, the episode didn't feel like a total mess. I liked what was there. I just wished we had gotten a little bit more of what the promos advertised. But what is there, I found interesting enough. And as for some of the nods, we finally got a boxing glove arrow. If I was really to take my usual critical pickaxe to that particular reference, I would say, well, anyone who has ever fired a bow before would know that it's not all that easy even to draw it back. So to actually aim your bow and fire it with this 1.5-pound boxing glove on the end of it, I think there will be a little bit more of a downward curve. I don't think it's going to shoot straight like your other arrows. But again, it was just a really quick reference that was amusing enough. Another moment I really liked, it's probably my favorite moment, and this is actually where I think the episode managed to tie these 2 plot lines together better than when they were trying to tie the Roy and Wildcat thing together. Was in the past, in the flashbacks, Oliver has to remember something that he subconsciously remembers, but not consciously remembers. So Rilo Fukushima finally gets something to do in the flashbacks in that she helps him remember what it was that he saw through meditation. Similarly, Oliver helps Roy remember what he did during his Mirakuru overdose, which is how the episode ends. Roy finally finds out that he killed a police officer. In this season, he has been very mature and having him and kind of setting him up to really come to terms with this past mistake or this past action that he doesn't even clearly remember all that well can actually make for some pretty solid dramatic material that I'm actually really looking forward to. I want to see where this whole plot line goes. Roy may not have killed Sarah, but he is a murderer. Although the very end of the episode left me kind of worried, in the sense that, oh wow, we're going to get a hammy villain next week, aren't we? Yeah. So hopefully Cupid will not completely destroy whatever mood this season is going for. And hopefully it will not feel too episodic or self-contained at the expense of the overall seasonal arc that they're going with for the League of Assassins and whatnot. So that's about all I got for this episode of Arrow, and as always, I am looking forward to the next one. I'm liking where this season is going for the most part. I still don't agree with the decision to kill Sarah, but where some of the teammates are going, like Oliver and Roy, I like where that's going. I like how a lot of the characters have advanced up to this point. This episode didn't really have a clear villain, but in a sense it didn't really need to. So yeah, do I think this episode could have actually stood to be 2 episodes? Yes, but for what we got, I still enjoyed myself.